It's the most wonderful time of the year. It is Indy 500 month, finally, once again. I have got a month of fantastic content ready to come your way, and I will be discussing a lot of it in the end of this video. But appropriate for May 1st, and actually one of the first times this has happened in a long time, and I think it's credit to the health of this particular event. We have the entry list for the Indianapolis 500. There are 36 cars on the entry list, meaning for a full field of 33 entries, there will be 3 drivers going home before the race. 3 drivers will not make it, and because, at least for this year, there are no locked-in spots, there could be some big names like Scott Dixon or Helio Castroneves or even Fernando Alonso, who could miss the race if they aren't fast enough. But to talk about that in a bit more detail is going to be for another video. In fact, I think it'll be a video tomorrow predicting exactly what the starting grid will look like. For today's video, we're just going to talk about the entry list because there were a few things of interest that we did not previously know. And it's also fun to kind of look at the statistics and kind of see where some of the drivers have come from and exactly where some of them may rank. So there are 7 former winners on this year's Indy 500 entry list. There's no real surprises. Buddy Lazier isn't showing up this year, but we've got Helio Castroneves, Scott Dixon, Will Power, the defending champion. We've also got Tony Kanaan, the 2013 winner, Alexander Rossi, probably the hottest driver in IndyCar racing right now, Ryan Hunter-Reay, and of course, Takuma Sato, the 2017 winner. Not a whole lot of surprises there, like I said, but what's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are also 7 rookies in this year's Indianapolis 500. And it's very possible that one of the winners, or one of the future winners joining that list of 7, could come out of this list of 7. Marcus Ericsson from Formula One, we'll be talking about him a little bit later in this video as well, is the first of the 7 rookies. We also have Felix Rosenqvist of Formula E fame. We also have Santino Ferrucci, no other words needed. Patricio Award, the young Mexican driver who won the Indy Lights Championship and is one of the hottest prospects in IndyCar racing and really, to be honest with you, world motorsports. In fact, Zach Brown is looking at hiring the guy, if that should tell you anything. Jordan King will be making his return for Rahal Letterman Lanigan. He currently races in Formula 2. Ben Hanley from the World Endurance Championship alongside new team for the series anyway, Dragon Speed Racing. And Colton Herta, friend of the channel, and one of the most recent IndyCar winners. He broke through at the ripe old age of 18 at Circuit of the Americas. And by the way, he was one of the fastest drivers in the Indy 500 test that happened a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, I'm going to expand upon a lot of those drivers, a lot of those stories in the Bandwagoners Guide that will be coming later this month. But I figure I'd give you a quick rundown of both sides of that spectrum, the very experienced winners and the inexperienced, in name only, really, rookies, the drivers who haven't raced in the Indy 500 before. And again, it's one of the most talented front-to-back rookie classes that we've seen in a very long time at the Indianapolis 500. So they should be very exciting to watch. There are 2 entries on this 36-car entry list that do not have drivers listed at this point. The first team is car number 77. That is entered by Aero Schmidt Peterson Motorsports as a 3rd car. And it's a little bit of a head-scratcher as to why it is still listed as TBA, which is to be announced, for those of you who are not familiar with Indy 500 entry lists, because Oriol Servia, the Spaniard who is one of the best Indy 500 only drivers, tested the car publicly in the Indy 500 test. Everybody pretty much at this point knows he's going to be in the car. He's already driven it. It was public, and yet it's not on the entry list. Now, how quickly that will be updated, who knows? But I think it's almost a 100% guarantee that Oriol Servia will be in that seat. Also, Juncos Racing, which made their second Indy 500 start last year with Kyle Kaiser, who was the reigning Indy Lights champion of 2017. They easily made the field as a one-car team with a rookie. That was one of the more impressive performances of last year's month of May. And while we don't have any confirmation 100% one way or the other, we believe it's going to be Kyle Kaiser returning to that seat once again. And I don't really know. I mean, there's always a possibility that a Jay Howard could come out of the woodwork and take that seat if the price was right. But I think at this point, I think the team is comfortable with Kaiser. I think Kaiser is comfortable at the Indy 500. That car has not been on an oval, to my knowledge, this entire season, though. So it is going to be a bit of an uphill climb for that team. But there you go. There's the two TBAs. I think it's going to be Servia and Kaiser. And if it's any different, it'd be very surprising. Just a real quick background on some of the drivers on this entry list, because it's always kind of fun to see what the international flavor of the Indy 500 is. No stock car drivers this year, and the only driver with any kind of short track, dirt oval experience is Ed Carpenter. Of course, but he's been an IndyCar driver full time for God knows how many years at this point, so I don't know if you can really still consider him a short track driver. But F1 experience, both of these drivers were full-time last season, Marcus Ericsson and, of course, Fernando Alonso. Speaking of Alonso, we're going to talk about the WEC drivers, specifically both coming from LMP1. Not really a surprise because LMP1 is in some ways equivalent to IndyCar in terms of performance. Go watch that Circuit of the Americas lap time comparison video to see just what I'm talking about. But Fernando Alonso from Toyota LMP1, of course, he's not going to return to that seat after the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Brendan Hartley's going to be taking it. But at the moment, he is looking like he's going to become world champion in the WEC, as well as, of course, I mentioned him before, Ben Hanley from Dragon Speed. We've also got Formula 2 experience, like I mentioned right now, full-time in the Formula 2 season. And by the way, if he qualifies for the Indy 500, he's going to race in Monaco in Formula 2 and then fly back for the Indianapolis 500. Jordan King. That could be something that would be very interesting to keep paying attention to throughout this month of May. Formula E experience, Felix Rosenqvist. I believe he ran the first race of the season in Formula E this year, and of course he ran full-time last year. Obviously, there's definitely a cult following of Formula E, and so if you're checking out the Indy 500 for the first time, maybe Rosenqvist is your guy. And then, of course, out of the IMSA series, which is kind of weird to say about this guy, but Helio Castroneves, the three-time winner looking for a fourth, is, of course, a full-time driver for Acura in the prototype division of IMSA. Couple of sponsorship announcements that weren't quite as public until this entry list came out. Joseph Newgarden, perhaps the most significant one, even though we've kind of known about this for a little while, is that he will have Shell V-Power Nitro Plus sponsorship on his car for the Indianapolis 500. It'll be the second Shell-sponsored car, in addition to Helio Castroneves with the Pennzoil. I would imagine this car will look an awful lot like Helio's cars used to when those cars were Shell-sponsored. Santino Ferrucci. This is a bit interesting because he's had David Yurman Jewelers as a full-time sponsor on his car throughout the season, but it is Slidell Manufacturing, which I believe is his father's company, and there, I guess, will now be a question of whether or not that car will be sporting the chrome livery that everybody likes. Personally, I'm hoping it's not. I'm hoping it has the nice purple livery that we saw at the end of last season, but I feel like I'm in the absolute minority on that one. And then finally, we've got Ed Carpenter driving the Preferred Freezer Services car. Now, that's not really a surprise that sponsor is associated with that team, but it's usually associated with Spencer Pigot. But, of course, since they lost Fuzzy's Vodka as a primary sponsor last year, I guess Ed got first dibs on whichever sponsorship dollars were going to be flowing into his team. And, of course, Ed Carpenter is always one of the guys who's a front runner at the Indianapolis 500, finished second last year. And then finally, Ben Hanley for Dragon Speed. We've talked about him quite a bit. Has 10-star listed as a sponsor, which I think is one of Dragon Speed's WEC sponsors. So that was just a brief discussion of the entry list itself. Stay tuned for a bandwagoner's guide to the Indianapolis 500 for a much more detailed look at the 36 cars trying for this year's Indianapolis 500. Speaking of that, let's talk a little bit about Indy 500 month, because there's going to be a lot of the content that you have come to expect from this month of coverage, and then some content that I'm looking at kind of expanding into and bringing you. And by the way, if you're interested in some sort of content that I may not have thought of or mentioned in this video that you'd like to see, I'd love to bring it to you. I think this Indy 500 month, I really want to try to give you guys a peek behind the curtain, take you places, show you things that ordinarily a lot of people wouldn't be able to see. So one of the things that I want to do, and I experimented with this at the Indy Open test, but I'll give you some live streams kind of walking through the grounds of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, giving you some discussion, and maybe, hey, even some live interviews if we can score those. It could be a lot of fun. Could also be total shambles, but hey, that's kind of the excitement of live broadcasts. Also going to be bringing back Indy 500 Evolution, one of the most requested things on my channel. Yes, gameplay is coming back. We're going to be doing the career mode, as well as a couple of special feature videos as well in that game. There's a certain anniversary of the Indy 500 coming up this year, having to do with a certain Mario Andretti, and I'm going to have a pretty interesting video on that out of that game. Also going to do some historical stuff. I've got one video in particular that's a top 10 list that I think you guys are going to find very interesting. And of course, as well, I'm going to try to, I think it was so successful to do the post-testing analysis. I'm going to try to do that for every single day at the Speedway. So if at the end of the day, I'm just going to find a place to post up with my tripod here and just give you my immediate thoughts after each practice session. And then, of course, I think qualifying and the IndyCar Grand Prix as well, just to give you some overview and hopefully some interesting perspectives, not only from my mouth and my brain, but also around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, giving you an interesting background for the videos. We'll see how that goes. I think that's everything. Mostly it's just, I mean, this is going to be a crazy month. I'm also going to be doing some fan meetups at the track or around the Speedway, depending on schedules and when I can work everything out. I think at least one I'm going to try to get at Speedway Indoor Karting. So if you guys want to show up at Speedway Indoor Karting, just make sure to check my Twitter, and you can race go-karts against me. Oh, speaking of go-karts, I will be racing this month as well. Sunday after the Grand Prix of Indianapolis. So the Grand Prix is on Saturday. The Sunday is open, but it's not open for Newcastle Motorsports Park, where I will be racing my go-kart. So if you want to watch me race in the month of May in Indiana, not Indianapolis, be sure to check that out because that could be interesting, and you could see me flip and break my neck, and that would be awesome, right, Reddit? But yeah, it's gonna be a hell of a month, I'll tell you, and I can't wait for you guys to be along for the ride. So thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more Indy 500 month coverage. Oh, by the way, I will also cover major topics and other motorsports if and when they come up. This is going to be a little bit of a change of pace because I may be talking about NASCAR in Indy 500 month, but it won't get in the Indy 500 month playlist. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. And we'll see you in the next Indy 500 month video.